I watched an Amish woman reach into a stone crock of cloudy water and pull out an egg that had been sitting in there since early spring. She cracked it into a cast iron pan. It was perfect. No smell. No runoff. A yolk that stood up tall and proud like it had been laid that morning. That egg was more than 4 months old. No refrigerator. No electricity. No power line running to that house at all. And it cooked up fresher than anything I've ever bought in a store. That should be impossible. It isn't. This is a habit Amish kitchens kept alive for generations, back when the rest of the country handed its eggs over to a machine and slowly forgot the older way ever existed. And the wildest part is how simple it turned out to be. By the end of this, I'll walk you through the exact method I finally tracked down, buried in a government farm bulletin from 1911 the moment this whole mystery finally cracked open for me. You can start it today, tonight even, with 2 ordinary things you almost certainly already have in your kitchen. No special gear, no gadget, nothing you have to buy off a shelf. I remember her hands most of all, knuckles dusted with flour, dipping past that milky surface without a flicker of hesitation, like she'd done it 10,000 times. And she had. That image stuck with me for years, because everything I thought I knew told me that egg should have made her sick. So let me take you through it the way it actually happened to me, because I didn't understand it either. I doubted it. I thought it was a fluke, or worse, that I was watching someone poison her own family. I was wrong on every count, and figuring out why is one of the strangest little journeys I've ever taken through an ordinary kitchen. Here's the first thing that broke my brain. I always believed an egg was a fragile thing, something that had to be kept cold, kept moving, used up fast before it turned on you. That's what I was taught. That's what you were taught too, probably. An egg out of the fridge is a ticking clock. But the egg is not fragile at all. The egg is one of the most perfectly sealed food packages that nature ever built. And I mean sealed in a way that would embarrass most modern packaging. When a hen lays an egg, the very last thing she does, in the final seconds before it leaves her body, is coat that shell in a thin, wet layer that dries almost instantly into an invisible seal. Farmers call it the bloom. Scientists call it the cuticle. It's a microscopic glaze of protein that plugs every single one of the thousands of tiny pores in the shell. And an eggshell has a lot of pores. Somewhere between 7,000 and 17,000 of them, depending on the egg. Every one of those is a little doorway. A doorway for air to get in, a doorway for moisture to get out, a doorway for bacteria to walk right through. The bloom slams all of those doors shut at once, the moment the egg is laid. That's why a fresh, unwashed egg can sit on a counter for weeks and be completely fine. Not days, weeks, because it's still wearing the armor the hen gave it. Now here's where my stomach dropped the first time I understood it. In most of Europe, they don't refrigerate eggs at all. Walk into a grocery store in France, in Italy, in Germany, and you'll find eggs sitting right out on a dry shelf at room temperature, next to the bread. Whole countries, millions of people, eggs on the shelf. And nobody's getting sick from it. So the question that started eating at me was simple. If the egg comes pre-sealed by nature, and half the world stores it on a shelf, then why on earth was I ever told it would kill me to leave one out overnight? Somebody, somewhere, changed the rules. And I wanted to know who and why. But that's getting ahead of the story, because the Amish woman with the crock wasn't just leaving eggs on a shelf, she was doing something more. She was taking a food that nature had already sealed for a few weeks and stretching that into months. And to understand how, I had to understand the second piece of the puzzle first. Something you can test with your own hands in under a minute tonight. Here's the clue that got me hooked. I noticed that every single egg in that farmhouse, whether it was in a basket or a bowl or that crock, was pointed end down, fat end up, narrow end down. Every one. It wasn't an accident. It was a rule. I asked why. And the answer opened up everything. Inside every egg, at the fat, rounded end, there's a little pocket of air. It's called the air cell. When an egg is first laid, that pocket is tiny, almost nothing. But over time, as air slowly seeps in through those pores and moisture seeps out, that air pocket grows bigger and bigger. That's what makes an old egg feel lighter. That's what makes a truly old egg float in water. The pocket has grown large enough to lift it. Now, the yolk inside wants to float too, because it's lighter than the white around it. If you store an egg pointed end up, or lay it on its side for a long time, that yolk drifts upward and eventually presses right against the air pocket or against the shell itself. And once the yolk touches that air, it starts to break down fast. It weakens. It goes off. But store the egg with the fat end up and the point down, and something quietly clever happens. The air pocket stays up top where it belongs, and the yolk stays cushioned, floating in the middle of the white, wrapped in that protective liquid on all sides. The yolk never touches the air, and an egg whose yolk stays centered stays fresh dramatically longer. Poultry researchers have measured this. Storing eggs point down keeps the yolk centered and can extend usable freshness by weeks compared to eggs stored carelessly on their side. Some producers store eggs point down for exactly this reason before they ever ship them. It costs nothing. It takes no equipment. It's just gravity, used on purpose. And here's your minute-long test, the one I promised. Take any egg you've got right now. Fill a glass or a bowl with cool water and set the egg in gently. If it lies flat on the bottom, it's very fresh. The air pocket is still tiny. If it stands up on one end but stays down, it's older but still perfectly good. Use it soon. And if it floats to the top, the air pocket has grown huge and the egg is past its prime. That float test has been used in farm kitchens for well over 100 years. And it works because it's reading the exact same air pocket we've been talking about. You just tested a century of egg science in your sink. So now I had two pieces. Nature seals the egg with the bloom, and gravity, used correctly, keeps the inside fresh far longer than anyone told me. That already explained eggs lasting weeks on a counter. But it did not explain 4 months in a crock of cloudy water. Not even close. The bloom alone doesn't get you to 4 months. Point-down storage doesn't get you to 4 months. There was still something in that water I hadn't figured out. And the more I chased it, the more I realized this wasn't some quaint little folk habit. This was a genuinely powerful piece of preservation science that most of us have never even heard whispered, which made me start asking a very uncomfortable question. How does something this useful just disappear from an entire country's memory? Therefore, I did what I always do when a kitchen habit makes no sense. I went digging into the old books, the farm manuals, the household guides from the 1800s and early 1900s, back when knowing how to keep food without a machine wasn't a hobby, it was survival. And what I found stopped me cold. Preserving eggs for the whole winter wasn't some rare secret back then. It was standard knowledge, ordinary, expected. Every farm wife knew some version of it, the way you know how to boil water. There were multiple methods written down again and again across dozens of old texts. Packing eggs in dry salt, packing them in sawdust or bran or wood ash, rubbing each egg with lard or butter or grease to seal the pores by hand, coating them in melted paraffin. All of these were doing the exact same thing. When you look close, they were replacing the bloom. They were resealing the pores that nature had sealed and that time would slowly open. Some of these methods worked okay, some worked poorly, but there was one method that showed up over and over in the record as the champion, the one the old writers described as keeping eggs good for 8 months, 10 months, even a full year and beyond. And it was the method I had watched in that farmhouse. The cloudy water in the crock. The old books called it water glassing. And here's the thing about a video like this one. What I'm handing you right now is real, it works, and it costs you nothing. But a screen only holds so much before I have to start leaving things out. The full research behind these old kitchen habits, the dated documents, the exact ratios, the mistakes that ruin a batch and how to catch them early, all of that I wrote down properly in my books, along with the other forgotten protocols from those same kitchens, keeping produce fresh for weeks without cold, putting a razor edge on a dull knife in under 2 minutes, and cleaning a whole house with nothing but baking soda, vinegar, and boiling water. Every method in there costs nothing and uses only what's already in your kitchen drawer. No gadget, no app, no special bag, no new refrigerator. Written by me, tested by me, for people who trust their own 2 hands over a label. If you want the complete collection, scan the QR code right there on your screen, link in the description, pinned comment. Then come right back here because we're not finished with this crock yet. Now hold that name, because I still owe you the rest of the story before we get to the how. Now hold that name, because I'm going to come back to exactly how it works and exactly how you do it, step by step, at the end. That's the payoff. That's the moment the whole thing came together for me. But I have to tell you the rest of what I found first, because it changed how I saw this entire subject. It stopped being a cute trick and started making me a little angry. Because here's the thing that gnawed at me. If this knowledge was so common, so ordinary, so written down that it filled the household manuals of an entire era, then where did it go? How does something every farm family in America knew just vanish inside a couple of generations, to the point where I stood in a kitchen as a grown adult and watched it happen and thought I was seeing witchcraft? That's not an accident of time. Knowledge that useful doesn't just evaporate on its own. Something replaced it. Something taught us to forget. And before I get to who and how, I want to stop and talk directly to one person watching right now. Maybe you're sitting there thinking this is all very nice for people with a barn and a flock of hens and a big stone crock and a root cellar. Maybe you live in an apartment, a small one. Maybe your whole kitchen is a strip of counter and a sink and one drawer that barely closes. Maybe you buy your eggs from a regular grocery store by the dozen like everybody else and you're thinking none of this is for you. This next part is for you especially, because I want you to know it works in the smallest kitchen in the world, with nothing but what you already own. You don't need a crock. A clean glass jar works. A big mason jar, a clean pickle jar, an old glass container with a lid, any of them. You don't need a farm, you don't need chickens, and you don't need any fancy equipment at all. Now, there is one real catch for the apartment cook, and I'm going to be honest with you about it, because I'd rather you know than have it fail. The long-term storage part, the months-long part, only works on unwashed eggs, eggs that still have their bloom. Standard grocery store eggs in most of America have been power washed at the plant, which strips that natural seal right off. That's actually a huge clue about our mystery, and I'll get to it. So for the full long-term method, you want farm eggs, a farm stand, a neighbor with hens, a farmer's market, a little sign on a country road that says fresh eggs. Those eggs still have their armor on, but even with plain washed grocery eggs, everything else I've told you still helps you today. Store them point down in a small container in the coldest part of your kitchen, and you'll stretch their life noticeably. Keep them in their carton, which shields them from picking up odors and moisture through those pores, and they last longer than loose eggs. Run the float test before you cook, and you'll never crack a bad one into your breakfast again. That's real money saved in a tiny kitchen, starting right now, with 0 new purchases. And once you get your hands on a dozen real unwashed farm eggs, that same little glass jar on your closet shelf becomes a machine that keeps them good for the better part of a year, in an apartment with no refrigerator space taken up at all. I've watched it work in a kitchen barely bigger than a closet. This is not farm-only knowledge. It was never farm-only knowledge. That's part of what was taken from us. So let's talk about who took it. Because now we get to the part that genuinely made me feel cheated. For most of American history, eggs were sold and stored the way half the world still does it, right out on the shelf, unwashed, sealed by their own bloom. That's how it was. Then, over the course of the early and middle 1900s, egg production got big, really big. Massive operations with thousands and thousands of hens crammed together, and when you pack that many birds that tightly, the eggs come out dirty, really dirty. So the big producers started washing the eggs. Made sense on the surface. Nobody wants a filthy egg, but washing an egg in water, especially warm water, does something the producers knew perfectly well. It strips off the bloom. It tears away the exact natural seal that let eggs sit safely at room temperature for weeks. The armor comes off in the wash, and an egg with its bloom washed off is suddenly vulnerable. Now those thousands of pores are wide open. Now bacteria can get in. Now that egg really does need to be kept cold, constantly, from the moment it's washed all the way to your kitchen, or it can spoil and even make you sick. So here's what happened, and here's the part I want you to really sit with. The industry created the problem by washing the eggs and then sold us the solution, which was mandatory, constant, cradle-to-grave refrigeration. A rule was built around a wound they inflicted themselves. In the United States, washed eggs by law now have to be kept cold the entire way to the store. And we were all taught, every single one of us, that this is just how eggs are. That an egg left out is dangerous. That the cold is what keeps you safe. But the cold was never the thing keeping eggs safe for thousands of years of human history. The bloom was. We had a perfect natural seal, and it was scrubbed off on an assembly line. And then we were handed a power bill and a rule and a lifetime of low-grade fear about a food that used to sit happily on the counter. And the old way, the water glass crock, the point-down basket, the unwashed egg that lasts all winter with no electricity at all, that way didn't just fade, it got in the way. It didn't sell refrigerators. It didn't sell constant cold chain trucking. It didn't sell anything at all. Which is exactly the problem. You can't put a price tag on a jar of water on a shelf. So it slipped quietly out of the cookbooks, out of the classes, out of the conversation, until a grown man could stand in a farmhouse and watch a 4-month-old egg fry up perfect and think he was losing his mind. The Amish never lost it because the Amish never plugged in. When you don't have a refrigerator running off the grid, you don't get to forget how people kept eggs before the grid existed. The knowledge survived in those kitchens for the simplest reason imaginable. They still needed it. And because they still needed it, they can hand it right back to us, whole and intact, exactly the way it always worked. So let me hand it to you now. This is the part I promised. This is where the mystery finally cracked all the way open for me. I finally found the method spelled out in plain, official black and white in a United States Department of Agriculture Farmers Bulletin from 1911, a government document written to teach ordinary farm families how to preserve their eggs through the winter. This wasn't folklore. This wasn't a rumor passed around a quilting circle. This was printed, tested, government-backed instruction from more than 100 years ago, describing the exact thing I'd watched in that Amish kitchen. The moment I read it, the whole puzzle clicked into one clean picture. The old-timers called it water glass because the original sealing liquid was something called sodium silicate, a syrupy substance that really does look a bit like liquid glass. You can still get sodium silicate today, but the method that spread through farm and Amish kitchens, and the one I'd most want you to use, relies on something even easier to find. It's called pickling lime. The chemical name is calcium hydroxide. You'll find it sold in the canning aisle for a few dollars, the same stuff people have used for generations to make crisp pickles. A single small bag lasts years. Here is the entire method. This is the finale. Write it down. You start with fresh, unwashed eggs. This matters more than anything else, so I'm saying it twice. Unwashed. The bloom has to be on the egg. Do not wash them. Do not wipe them. Do not rinse them. If an egg is a little dirty, set that one aside and eat it soon. Don't put it in the jar. Only clean, dry, unwashed eggs go in. You take a clean glass jar or a crock or a food-safe container. You mix your lime water. The old ratio, the one written down again and again, is about 1 ounce of pickling lime to every quart of water. In plain kitchen terms, that's roughly 1 tablespoon of pickling lime stirred into 4 cups of cool water. Stir it well. The lime won't fully dissolve, and that's fine. That's exactly why the water looks cloudy and milky. That cloudiness is the whole secret I'd been staring at in that crock. It was never dirty water. It was lime water. You gently lower your unwashed eggs into the jar. And here's where the very first clue comes back around. You place them point down, fat end up, just like the basket. Layer them in carefully so they don't crack. Then you make sure the eggs are covered by at least 1 inch or 2 of the lime water so none of them are poking out into the air. Put a lid on it loosely and set it somewhere cool and dark. A pantry shelf, a basement, a closet floor, a cupboard away from the stove. That's it. That's the entire thing. No power, no checking, no fuss. And now here's why it works. The science under the folklore. The calcium in that lime water reacts with the shell and forms a fine layer of calcium carbonate right over the surface, sealing those thousands of pores back up. It rebuilds the bloom the egg lost to time, better and tougher than before. The water itself blocks air from reaching the shell, and the lime makes the whole solution alkaline, which is an environment bacteria simply cannot grow in. Sealed pores, no air, no bacteria. The egg just sits there, suspended in time. How long? The old bulletins and the modern folks who've revived this all land in the same place. Water-glassed eggs keep good for 8 months to a year easily, and many report going well past a year, up toward 18 months and even 2 years, with the eggs still perfectly usable from a jar on a shelf with no electricity at all. That is the 4 months I watched, and then some. That was the impossible thing, explained. When you want an egg, you reach in, lift one out, rinse the lime off under the tap, and use it. One small note that costs you nothing to remember. Don't hard-boil a water-glassed egg straight from the jar, because the sealed shell can crack from the pressure. Poke a tiny pinhole in the fat end first, or just use them for frying, scrambling, and baking, which is what they're best at anyway. That's the only rule. Think about what that means. For a few dollars of lime and a jar you already own, you can take 1 dozen or 2 dozen or 10 dozen fresh eggs in the cheap season, when the hens are laying like crazy and eggs cost next to nothing, and you can carry them all the way through the winter, tasting fresh, with no refrigerator, no freezer, no power, no waste. That's what that farm wife knew in 1911. That's what the Amish kitchen never forgot, and now it's yours. I stood in that kitchen convinced I was watching something that couldn't be real, and it turned out I was just watching something we'd all been quietly talked out of remembering. The egg was never the mystery. The forgetting was, here's what I want you to take away. More than the lime, more than the jar, somebody decided that the simplest, cheapest, most self-reliant way to keep your own food wasn't worth remembering because it couldn't be sold back to you. And a whole country nodded and forgot. You just took it back. A jar of cloudy water on a shelf, and suddenly you don't need their cold chain, their rules, or their fear to keep a basket of eggs alive through the snow. If you're the kind of person who hates throwing away good food, who's tired of paying for systems built to keep you paying, who trusts what you can test with your own 2 hands over what a label tells you, then you already think like the people who kept this knowledge alive. You belong with them. This channel is where we dig this stuff back up, one buried habit at a time. Now I want to hear from you, and I want a real answer, not just a scroll on by. Here's my question. Are you going to trust it enough to eat that first water-glassed egg after it's been sitting in the jar for 6 months? Be honest. Type yes, I'll do it, or type no way, not a chance, right down in the comments. I read them, and I promise you half the fun is watching people argue themselves into it. And if you want to be there when I show you the next one, subscribe and stay close, because we're not done recovering what got taken. The next thing I'm chasing is something I watched in the same kind of kitchen, A slab of butter that sat out on the table for weeks in the summer heat and never once went rancid. No fridge, no ice, nothing but one small thing they did to the dish before the butter ever went in. I found out how, and it's even simpler than the eggs. I'll see you there. This video showed you how it works, but the full crock method, step by step with your 2 kitchen staples, laid out so you can start tonight. That's waiting inside the Amish kitchen circle. When a question comes up, you can ask me directly, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen, and you can cancel anytime with one click. Now that you know this little secret, let me show you something just as useful. In the next video, I'll share the simple Amish way to keep onions fresh for a whole year. No rotting, no sprouting. It's starting right here.